So we're really excited to meet with all of you today. We're first going to start with a project overview. Then we'll touch back on our public feedback that we received so far since public meeting 1. We'll show our preliminary design concept that we developed based on that feedback. And then we'll dive into some of the next steps. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have some time for questions, but we will also want to take a look at the roll plots in more detail after we talk through some of the topics during this presentation. So first, touching on the project timeline, here we are at the public meeting number 2. We had our first meeting in April, and that's where we introduced the project, explained the existing conditions analysis, and received feedback from all of you. We've been working hard and incorporating that feedback into our preliminary design role plans. And after the meeting today, we'll gather more of your feedback and incorporate that into the updated design. We're aiming for construction in 2024. Just a recap of the project study area. We start at South Duke Street and Chesapeake Street. This area is the west part of the corridor, and it's highlighted in green on the map on the right. And we are going all the way up to East Orange Street and North Broad Street intersection. As a part of our analysis, we also looked at future connections to Queen Street. So the red dashed line there is showing the west end of our corridor that we've designed at South Duke Street and extending to Queen Street. So we'll have some visioning typical sections to show you in the PowerPoint today. Just wanted to reiterate the project purpose. We're looking to implement the Lancaster County Active Transportation Plan. This plan focuses on connectivity and tying into existing and planned facilities. We want to link communities and destinations, and we're looking to serve all ages and abilities on these facilities. Both Broad Street and Chesapeake Street are planned facilities in the plan. We also want to implement the Lancaster Vision Zero policy. This focuses on reducing vehicle speeds and improving safety for all roadway users, but especially for people who walk, bike, and take transit. There's also some high crash locations along the corridor, so we're looking to address those and incorporate those improvements as a part of our project. And just wanted to explain why now. Why are we implementing this facility now? There's a planned resurfacing project on the corridor, so we want to make sure we're incorporating those safety improvements and bicycle facilities with that resurfacing project. Tying that all into the goals of the project, we want to improve safety and improve those locations that are on the high injury network. We want to reduce vehicle speeds along the corridor, provide those comfortable connections to the people who walk, bike, and take transit, and also build out the active transportation network. Just a reminder of what the corridor looks like. There's 4 distinct sections of the corridor that vary. The typical section varies, but both Broad and Chesapeake are classified as a 2-way minor arterial. There's 2 to 3 travel lanes, some on-street parking, and in some cases, left turn lanes that are dedicated or a shared left turn lane. And there's also a variety of different land uses along the corridor. There's hills and there's roadway curves. So it makes for a very interesting corridor to design a bicycle facility on. Just a recap of the existing conditions analysis. There was a couple of high crash areas that were identified. These also overlap with the high injury network locations. So that's at South Duke Street, South Ann Street, and also the section of North Broad Street between Walnut and East King Street. There's also high speeds documented on the corridor, and we also heard that feedback from all of you as well. 97% of the vehicles are traveling over that 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. There's a school zone on the corridor near between South Ann Street and Almanac Avenue, kind of right where we are right now. And there's also 4 transit stops in the vicinity of the corridor. Red Rose Transit Authority Route 1 travels southbound on Broad Street and westbound on Chesapeake, and there's stops at Claremont Avenue, Circle Avenue, near Stevens Avenue near a driveway, and then also just north of the South Ann Street intersection. So that was just a kind of a recap. We're going to now dive into some of the public feedback before we talk through how we have incorporated that into the design. Just wanted to touch on some of the key issues that we've heard. So as we saw with the speed data, vehicle speeds are too fast along this corridor. The roadway geometry, the topography, this all adds to that speeding. It encourages that speeding. We heard that it was hard to cross the street in some locations, and there's some mid-block crossings that are not marked with crosswalks. So poor intersection visibility leads to that feeling of unsafe crossings. We're hearing about the safety of pedestrians crossing at mid-block locations. There's a few transit stops along the corridor that might have a mid-block crossing. And then hearing about double parking, especially in front of the school here, where during the school pickup and drop off, sometimes there's double parking, and that leads to some challenges understanding if it's safe to cross the street. We have a quick slide about that. Between South Ann Street and Marshall, sometimes there's double parking during the school pickup and drop off, and those parked cars kind of prohibit that visibility to clearly see to cross the street. So just wanted to talk through the preliminary design concept, and first starting with why we chose a separated facility to implement on this corridor. There are many different considerations that came into play here. First of all, the roadway characteristics, the existing condition analysis information that we just shared, and then also the public feedback about the key issues along the corridor. When you're choosing a bicycle facility, you take into account characteristics of the roadway like vehicle volumes and speeds. And for that reason, a separated bike lane is the most comfortable facility for bicyclists of all ages and abilities. There's also high crash intersections along the corridor as well. And so we want to make sure we're picking that facility that's addressing those challenges along the corridor. And this facility is also a low-stress facility and attracts more users as well. As we were incorporating this information and working on the design of the facility, it became apparent that we have some pinch points along the corridor, and in order to incorporate a separated facility, we were looking to design a two-way facility on one side of the roadway. There's a lot of benefits to this. It reduces the conflict points with the loading zone of the school at George Washington Elementary, where we are. So this two-way facility would be on the south side of the roadway, where the parking and the school pickup and drop-off is on the north side. It also avoids conflicts with the Route 1 transit stops along the corridor. because that route is southbound on North Broad Street and also westbound. So it's on the opposite side of the bicycle facility. We also can provide access and connection to the Greenway Trail, which will be on the east side, the same side of the street as the proposed facility. And as I mentioned, the kind of combining the facility onto one side of the street allows us to make it through those pinch points without going lower than the minimum required width for the bicycle facility. So it requires less width than traditional bike lanes at those pinch point areas. There's a few two-way separated bicycle facility examples in other cities in Pennsylvania. There's 7th Street in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is the image on the left. There's also King Street in York, there's 2 images there on the right. So this slide here is going to step through an example typical section. This is just a sample of the typical sections we'll be showing along the 4 different sections of the corridor. But all of them will be consistent where they have the bicycle facility on the south side of the roadway on Chesapeake between South Duke Street and Almanac Avenue. And then the bicycle facility will be on the east side of the street from Almanac Avenue to King Street. In some cases, there's parking lanes in the typical section, in the sections of the corridor where there's parking, and I'll explain that at each section as well. But typically, the width of the parking lane is 7.5 feet to 8 feet. And it's 7.5 feet at pinch point locations only. The travel lane varies from 10 feet to 12 feet, but the majority of the travel lanes along the corridor are 11 feet wide. Only at the pinch point, kind of on this block here, is where they would be 10 feet. This buffer ranges from 1 feet to 3 feet, and there in this image here, there's a flex post in the graphic. That's vertical delineation. And along the corridor, that is included either a flex post or maybe a parking stop is included where at intersections or high conflict locations. The separated bike lane ranges from 8 feet to 10 feet. And we'll talk through more in the coming slides here. So here's the first section that we'll talk through, the South Duke to South Franklin section. This image is showing what that typical cross-section looks like. There's 2 travel lanes and 2 parking lanes. Just a reminder that this is the section where there is the school zone from South Ann to Almanac Avenue. There's also a transit stop at just north of South Ann Street. And there is also another transit stop near near Stevens Avenue as well. So just introducing the proposed design solution, and the typical section on the bottom right-hand corner is what is the typical section for this part of the corridor, similar to what we showed in the sample typical section. The separated 2-way bike lane is on the south side of the street, and the bicycle facility will replace the on-street parking that's on the south side of the street. Along this section of the corridor, we also introduce high visibility crosswalks and daylighting at key crossing locations and some of those mid-block crossing locations to improve visibility. narrowing the vehicle lanes to include this bicycle facility will help to slow speeds along this section of the corridor. Sorry. We'll also have a slide about daylighting later, or we'll talk about the intersection improvements later in this presentation. The next section is South Franklin to Circle. If we take a look at the image on the left here, we can see that the typical section of the existing conditions varies from that first section. We have one travel lane in each direction with a center turn lane, and then we have a shoulder on each side of the road. There's also curves on this section of the road and steep grades. We have steep grades throughout the corridor. And we also have a transit stop in this section at Circle Avenue. When we look at the proposed design typical section, the separated two-way bike lane is on the east side of South Broad Street. And we have our two travel lanes and then a shoulder on the west side. We're looking to slow those vehicle speeds down as we narrow the width of the roadway for vehicles. We're providing connections to the Conestoga Greenway Trail with shared lane markings in the parking lot. We're also providing a gateway traffic calming island, and we're providing a pedestrian refuge island near the transit stop to help shorten that distance of the distance that pedestrians need to cross the roadway. We're also increasing the visibility at intersections and mid-block crosswalks with using high visibility crosswalks. And we're incorporating those high visibility crosswalks throughout the corridor as well. So from the section of Circle to New Dauphin, yet again, the existing conditions typical section is different. We have two travel lanes, a center turn lane, and parking on both sides of the road. On this section, we also have a transit stop at Claremont Avenue. So when we're taking a look at the proposed design here, in this section, the two-way bike lane is on the east side of South Broad. We're maintaining the parking on both sides of the street. So in the typical section, you can see the separated bike facility is inside of the parking lane. So it's a parking separated facility. We have our two travel lanes and then another parking lane on the west side of the street. In this section of the corridor, we're incorporating gateway islands as traffic calming features at the beginning and end of this residential section of the corridor to slow vehicle speeds entering and departing that section. We're also incorporating a pedestrian refuge island at Claremont Avenue, where the transit stop is located, and also at New Dauphin Street. There's additional intersection improvements at New Dauphin, such as slow turn wedges or mountable slow turn islands to help slow turning vehicle speeds at those locations. Finally, from New Dauphin to King, the existing conditions typical section looks similar. We have two travel lanes in each direction, a center turn lane, and parking on both sides of the street. But the land uses in this area are different. We have Thaddeus Stevens on the west side of the street. So when we look at the proposed design, the separated two-way bike lane remains on the east side of South Broad Street, and it will replace the on-street parking on that side of the street. So with this design, the parking is maintained on the west side, the southbound part of that section. And as we mentioned, and in this section, there's also a gateway island north of New Dauphin. And when we look at the roll plans, we can kind of point those out as we're talking at the roll plan.
Would you like us to wait to ask questions at the end?
Yes.
Okay.
So just this design concept slide is showing each of those typical sections. So South Duke to South Franklin is this section at the south side of the corridor. South Franklin to Circle is in the middle. Then we come to Circle to New Dauphin, shown here, and New Dauphin to East King in the purple line up here. So next, wanted to talk through the key tools in our toolbox that we were applying at each intersection to address the issues identified in the existing conditions analysis and through the public feedback. All of these treatments here shown on the slide are helping to improve visibility at intersections. For example, daylighting here, I'll explain a little bit further. This image on the far left, daylighting introduces parking restrictions at intersection corners with pavement marking and flexible delineator posts. The purpose of this daylighting is to improve driver visibility of pedestrians at intersections and in the crosswalk area. We have conflict markings. These are green and white pavement markings through intersections or at driveway locations to draw attention to those areas where there are conflicts, where a bike lane is crossing a vehicle travel lane. High visibility crosswalks are shown here, and these are helpful to also improve visibility of pedestrian crossing locations. Bicycle boxes are another green pavement marking that help position bicyclists in front of vehicles at intersections when they have to make a movement through an intersection. There are other intersection treatments that help delineate space for bicyclists and narrow the roadway. So flexible delineator posts can help delineate the space where bicyclists are traveling, but they can also help create that visually narrowing the roadway. Parking stops in the top right corner are another treatment that we can use. Pedestrian refuge islands help shorten the crossing distance and limit pedestrian exposure to vehicles. And slow turn wedges and neighborhood gateway traffic calming islands, these are tools that we can use to help slow speeds along a corridor and at intersections. A slow turn wedge, these are rubber curbs or mountable islands that are placed at intersection corners to slow those turning vehicles and ensure that they take that proper movement rather than cutting a corner very sharp. We highlighted 4 intersections along this corridor, but I would want to say that the key intersection improvements that are incorporated at every intersection or location along the corridor are high visibility crosswalks, daylighting, and bicycle conflict markings. There's a couple of these key intersections where bicycle boxes are included when there's a complicated intersection geometry. There's also other tools that we're looking at, such as the mountable slow turn corner and the pedestrian refuge island. So we're incorporating those pedestrian refuge islands when we have that enough space, enough width of the roadway, but also when we want to shorten that crossing distance for example, at locations where there was a transit stop or another longer crossing distance. Also wanted to touch on the future connection to Queen Street. So from South Duke Street to the west to Queen Street, there are two different scenarios here. There's some sections of that corridor that have on-street parking, and then there's some sections that do not have on-street parking. So on the left here, we have two alternatives. In order to incorporate the continuous two-way bicycle facility on this section, we would have to remove parking on one side of the street. So on alternative one, the parking lane is on the south side of the street and adjacent to the the bike lane. Although there is a kind of a consideration here for how narrow that buffer is, and there's a consideration for whether that's enough space and would preclude the dooring consideration there. The other option is maintaining the parking on the north side of the street, and with the bicycle facility remaining on the south side. And then in the other sections, this looks similar to some of our design sections where we have no parking. We have maintained the two-foot shoulder on the north side of the street. We have our two travel lanes and then a bicycle facility with a 3-foot buffer. This slide just kind of summarizes a lot of what we were talking through today and how these different design solutions can help address some of our concerns and a lot of the key issues along the corridor. Number one, we're really looking to slow these vehicle speeds. We can do that through narrowing the travel lanes for vehicles and incorporating that two-way facility on one side of the street. We also have key locations where we're introducing other traffic calming treatments like gateway, islands. We're also looking to enhance visibility at intersections and increase that pedestrian safety at those intersections and mid-block crossings. So we're using those tools of daylighting, high visibility crosswalks, pedestrian refuge islands to do that. Also want to increase that access to transit stops as well. And then finally, we're also creating that low stress facility, trying to meet all ages and abilities to use that facility. So that was one reason why the two-way facility really works well on this corridor. So I'll show some of the next steps, and then we can open it up for some questions before we take a look in more detail at the roll plans. The roll plans will show those plan views, and so we can use everything we talked through today to explain what that looks like on the plan view. So today we're really looking for feedback from all of you. We have Post-it notes and pens and paper at the roll plans. We'll take all of that feedback and incorporate that and update our design. Our plan is that we would revise that updated design in the fall of 2023 and work towards the construction in 2024. Thanks.